Hello, everyone. My name is Joseph Kent. I'm the Director of Education for the National Atomic Testing Museum. On behalf of the museum staff and the Nevada Test Site Historical Foundation, I would like to welcome you to tonight's distinguished panel discussion highlighting the current critical programs of the Nevada National Security Site. Following the last underground nuclear weapons test in 1992, the mission of the NNSS has shifted to ensuring the security of the United States and its allies, through many of the programs that you'll learn about this evening, including their efforts in maintaining the national stockpile, preventing nuclear weapons proliferation, and responding to all manner of nuclear events. We are honored to be hosting such an esteemed group of individuals for this panel discussion, and are thankful for the opportunity to once again be working with the Nevada National Security Site. Our panelists will be answering audience questions following the event, so if you do have a question for them, please hold it until the end, and for those of you watching via Zoom, please put that in the Zoom chat box below. It is now my pleasure to present John Longnecker, Chairman of the Nevada Test Site Historical Foundation, who will be introducing Mark Martinez, President of Mission Support and Test Services, LLC, the management and operating contractor of the NNSS. Thank you so much.
Joe, thank you, and thank you all for joining us tonight. Mark Martinez is the president of MSTS, the site contractor, but I'd like to begin tonight, rather than reading his bio, which is very impressive, by just recognizing him and his team for the great support that they give us at the museum. It's just fantastic partnership, and they support us in so many ways in our educational and museum outreach activities. There's not a week that goes by, and if you ask Mark, he'd probably say there's not a day that goes by, and sometimes several times a day, that Darwin or Linda or I or someone on the board isn't reaching out to him to ask how we can partner on a new initiative to help the community or help the museum. What we're doing tonight is a really important part of the Foundation's communication to the community regarding the tremendous programs and fantastic science and technology activities at the site. In addition, though, to this outreach, the museum has a strong focus on reaching out to students in our community to let them know about the tremendous career opportunities that exist in national security and environmental management here in Nevada and around the country. We still feel so fortunate that in the recent 2022 appropriation, the foundation that manages the museum received $2 million to expand and improve our STEM and educational programs. And we've been working with Mark and his team to develop a science education center here in Las Vegas that's going to help us communicate to a broad range of students in this community and throughout Nevada so that they understand the tremendous career opportunities there are right here in our community. Mark, none of what we do in these missions would be possible without you and your team's continued strong support. So thank you. And Mark, back to you to kick off this evening's event.
Very good, thank you. It's good to be here. Thank the museum for the opportunity to talk a little bit about what we're doing. And most importantly, thank you all for being here and those people online who are watching this. Much appreciation for taking a little time to learn a little bit more about us. I do want to echo what John said, is that one of our big focuses is in STEM. And hopefully we'll be able to explain why that is tonight and why we're so passionate about that, especially here in Nevada, Southern Nevada. It's such a critical thing as the work what we're doing is so important. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give a little bit of a brief statement, then I'm going to introduce the panel here, and because they're going to do all the heavy lifting for me today. As you know, I'm the president, so I don't have to do anything. You know, I got peeps that do that. So, so first of all, MSTS, Mission Support and Test Services, took over this contract here about, a little over 4 years, 4.5 years ago, and we had some pretty high goals. And before us, the previous contractors were phenomenal. They did great work. They pretty much all took the, were able to stay in place for the full duration of the contracts. And so, in a lot of ways, we do feel like we were standing on the shoulders of giants that had come before us. But we thought as we move forward, what we wanted to accomplish is, I'm having a hard time reading this from here. We obviously want back up. There we go. We want to be able to ensure that the Nevada test site is viable and is able to support the national security missions. As you'll see today, there are multiple missions. A lot of people focus on the weapons program, but there are a lot of missions, and we wanted to be able to support that. But under the vision, you'll see that first line, we wanted to be the preferred site to do this experimental work. And what I want to try to show you tonight is that in a lot of ways I think we've been successful. And it is an MSTS. Okay, I'm going to refer now to us from this point on as the NNSS, the Nevada National Security Site. The NNSS has become a preferred site to do this kind of work. And so let's go to the next slide if we could. There we go. So my joke is that only 2 of the letters in the NNSS make sense, and that's national security. Because you can look at that map and you can say, well, gee, Mark, that's more than Nevada. Okay, so the first N doesn't make sense because we should call ourselves the USA National Security Site. But then the last S, it's more than a site, unless we pluralize the last S and make it sites. And so just get a quick look at the places that we are. And just quickly, we're at places where the National Weapons Laboratories are, Sandia, Los Alamos, and Livermore. We have places there. We're at both Nellis and Andrews Air Force bases with some of our response mission. Alexis will talk about that maybe a little bit. And then we have some other places like the down in Santa Barbara, Tough Living down there, the Special Technologies Laboratory. So we have a lot of places. All of this sort of was derived out of the the early weapons days. All right, can you hear me? All right. So let's. Well, he's running back there. We'll try to go to the next slide. That shows you a little bit of what we are as we helps you think about who you're talking to today. So maybe go to the next slide. Next slide is sort of the point. There we go. All right. So if you take a look at that, the bars represent the reality. But basically, when we took over this contract, we were projected at being a $450 million to $500 million program or institution for the duration, for the entire 10-year program that was out in front of us. This year, we're $820 million. Tremendous growth, and it's because of the great work that the people that are out there are doing. And so one of the first points I wanted to make is that the Nevada National Security Site is a very important economic engine for Southern Nevada, especially in terms of real science and technology jobs, good benefits, and things like that. And so we represent something that's, I think, is very important to the to Nevada, and I would say our congressional delegation agrees with that pretty strongly. And so you get to see some real data there of what we're dealing with. Okay, so message is the nation has looked to us, they find us important, and they want to invest. And you'll hear a lot about the investments that we're going forward with. Let's go to the next slide. So a couple things. First of all, that chart shows it's sort of the number of experiments that we were doing in what's called the subcritical experiments, number of experiments we were doing historically. Now, when I first started coming out here, I'm on the left-hand side, I'm old, and we were doing some things, but you'll notice that in the middle of that, it's this U shape. In the middle, we weren't doing too many. Now you look at where we're headed, is that up and to the right arrow is very real. A lot more experiments are coming our way. So at this point, I want to introduce Gene Hunt, who's going to be talking about a lot of this work in the weapons program, the growth, the kind of things that we're doing. Gene has a long history here at the test site. I'm not really saying you're old, but you have a long history here. Long history. Yeah. Actually, he was involved in some underground tests, and so he's a knowledgeable person there. Currently is focused at Jasper, and but has done subcritical work, subcritical experiment work, and he's one of these resident experts that we rely on heavily to, as we guide ourselves going forward technically. So we'll let Gene talk a little bit later, but let's go to the next slide. I don't know if I have 1 or 2 slides per. I don't know. All right, let me, as we're working on the slides here, let me keep going here. Next to Gene, we have Dr. Darcie Dennis-Koller. Darcie is a leader of our global security organization. Okay, so we got the other slide there. Before I jump on to Darcie, the title of that slide is really important. All roads lead to Nevada. All roads to weapons certification, flow through Nevada. And so by that, we no longer explode. We no longer generate nuclear energy with our testing. Things are based on what the laboratories are able to model and do with the supercomputers that they have and their excellent modeling capabilities. But you have to benchmark the codes and everything else, and we are the people that provide the data that allows them to be benchmarked. And so when we say all roads to certification lead through Nevada, it's because at some point to get to certification, you've got to come through Nevada, which again points out the importance of what we're doing. And in the future here, I just want to open the door, and you can ask Gene about this later, but this program called ECSE, Enhanced Capability for Subcritical Experiments, that is probably be $1.5 billion kind of investment that the country's making out here that will put experimental capabilities in an experimental test bed that will last 30 plus years. So not only are things happening today and benefiting us today, but the strong future. All the laboratories, all the 3 weapons laboratories are participating in this. This is a big deal for us, and it ensures that we will be able to continue to certify the stockpile absent nuclear testing. So very critical program there. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, so the next thing, now we're on to Darcie. One of the things that we are very much interested in and we work on is we're engaging in preventing nuclear proliferation. So we have a pretty significant program going on. The questions you want to talk to Darcie about, give them a key of what tough questions to ask you, are things about where are we going? There's significant interest in investing more and more to create the kind of test beds that we need to get the data to help us ensure and understand what other proliferant nations and others are doing. And so a lot of interest coming there. When I say a lot of interest, we start talking, I think it's fair to say, hundreds of millions of dollars in investment. So you can see a bright economic future, and the reason why is because of the great work that Darcie and her crew do. So she's recognized as a strategic leader within the national security enterprise. She's spent considerable time in DC, has been a technical advisor back there, and we're really fortunate that we were able to get her. She comes out of Los Alamos. She led innovative experimental shock and detonation physics research at Los Alamos National Laboratory for 21 years. Like I said, she's had a number of leadership and management jobs, and so somebody we're very fortunate that's joined us in not too distant past, but we're glad to have her, and she really now has an opportunity to drive a program, in a very positive direction for much success. So let's go on to the next slide. You guys want me off the stage because the fun stuff's about ready to happen. Okay, some things that again you might want to talk to Alexis about is, my goodness, up on the top there, in our backyard. The state of Nevada has in its backyard some of the foremost capabilities to detect and to measure and to monitor a nuclear kind of release. Okay, you might want to ask her how she's helped in other places like Japan in the Fukushima disaster there, and how quickly other people start to recognize the great work that they do. Let's see, are you able to go to the Super Bowl? occasionally get to, is it a good gig? They don't get to see the game, but they are there. So, I keep saying, well, I'd like to go on one of those things. Then I hear what really happens. No, never mind. I'm not going. So, but Dr. Alexis Reed, she started with us in the remote sensing laboratory in 2008 as a scientist with the NNSS consequence management program. She's had a lot of different jobs: search management, search response, nuclear radiological advisory team, and nuclear incident response department. So a lot of background, a very capable and well-recognized, complex-wide and maybe even internationally, with the capability that she brings to bear. She is a career emergency responder for the NNSA. It's kind of interesting. And then she continues to support deployable and home team positions for for our laboratory out here at Nellis. Can I say anything about our current condition? They're stood up because of Ukraine. In our backyard. Nevada is a major contributor to national security. So ask her all the tough questions. And then let's go to the next slide, please. Okay, back up one. So I'll talk about Joel now. So this is an extraordinarily busy slide that Joel will show again. I'll let him explain it. But the point is these are all projects and investment and opportunities we have to be successful with so that we can execute the mission. If you don't have the infrastructure, you can't get it done. And infrastructure is as simple, right, Joel? Simple as roads, power, water. Did I mention that the Nevada National Security Site, the test site, is bigger than the state of Rhode Island? That all the other sites, the NNS sites, you can put all of them. You can put them together and stuff them inside of the Nevada test site and still have plenty of room left over. And Joel has the honor and privilege of trying to manage that and keep it going. And remember I said we were supposed to be a $450-ish million, and now we're at 820. That comes with a big demand signal that says we've got to do more and we've got to build more, and so critical to have somebody like Joel leading that. So Joel is our enterprise infrastructure program director. He owns right now about a $250 million portfolio. He's very thoughtful in how we can go forward. He thinks outside the box, and absent doing that, you're sort of trying to get blood out of a turnip in a lot of ways. And so he's very thoughtful and thinks about these things really well, and is planning this growth. The growth, and he may talk about this, I don't know what he's exactly going to say, but you may want to ask him, does this translate into local contractors in the community? Okay, it absolutely does. And this is where we need the community as well. My expertise here is not building all these things, but I have to get them built. And so we have desperate need on infrastructure. So Joel joined the Department of Energy in 1992. He's held federal contractor positions and assignments within key areas, including nuclear weapons laboratories. I knew Joel when he was working at Los Alamos, and so I've known Joel for quite a while. So he has a lot of background that's useful to this. I won't go on and on, but he does understand construction, infrastructure, and he's very, I can't think of the word I'm looking for. I keep coming back to it, but he's very, he's able to find ways to get things done that other people might not recognize. So with that, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to turn it over to Gene. You're up first, and what'll happen is they'll each talk, and at the end, I guess we'll get questions. So I think I've got to hand this to Gene. There we go.
Well, thank you very much. I went on vacation, and I come back, and I found out I was given the opportunity to work on this panel, which unbeknownst to me. And so a couple weeks later, they says, "Where are your slides?" So I go, "Oh, presentation." So it gets back to, what is it for? Why is it for? And who is it for? I think Mark just talked a little bit about the what's, about the growth and the community and how many dollars this brings to the community. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about, the who and the why. So if we can go to the next slide. I guess he's busy over there. And you saw this slide that Mark had presented, and you can see that, no, that's fine. You can stay right there. No, you can go to the next slide. Yeah, and I don't want to reduplicate it. All right. So why would I show something like this? What you see here is a picture of the Nevada test site, and you can see that it looks like a moonscape that, we have detonated, close to 1,000 experiments at the test site. Unfortunately, I was an engineer running around during the 80s and doing quite a few of these, and come 92, it stopped. What happens to the test site? It became a ghost town. Everybody went home. There was no testing. As a diagnostic field engineer, there was nothing to field. People started to leaving. Money went away. The labs were trying to figure out what they were going to do. There was a lot of discussions that we didn't need the test site anymore. Why do we need testing? We did over almost 1,000 tests. We have all of the data from nuclear tests that we ever need to figure out how to build a nuclear bomb. If we couldn't figure it out after 1,000 tests, we're in pretty bad shape. So let's go on to not the next slide, but the slide after that, slide 5. So we went through this period of about 4 years. And even though it says 1992 on this, we really didn't start to begin to do what we call subcritical experiments. And this is in an area called U1A, which we'll kind of look at in just a moment. And so, there was thoughts of getting back to doing experiments because even though we had supercomputers and people had, felt like they had all the data, there was always a lot of questions. You never ask a scientist, does he have enough data or has he answered all the questions? Because the answer is no, never. And so, we started slowly going back to testing. And what I want to point out here is there's 2 parts to our modernization in the future of the test site. And it's called the workforce and the infrastructure. Joe's going to talk a little bit about the infrastructure. I'll talk a little bit about it. But the workforce is something that is near and dear to me. I was the manager in the last 6 years of the scientists and the engineers and the technicians that supported all of the experiments at the Nevada test site from a nuclear weapons standpoint. And I took that to heart because I was required to increase the workforce by at least 25%. Plus, we wanted to bring in new expertise because we had new diagnostics that we were bringing in. And so we could see the future, but we needed people. So we wanted to bring in new people, retain them, and encourage them because going to the test site, which is, our work location was about 90 miles from Las Vegas. It's a little difficult to get people out there sometime. But we were doing some pretty cool science, and that was a little bit of a help, but still, the care and feeding of people, that to me is the basis for what the Nevada test site, and I know that's not a term that's, used anymore, but, you know, the Nevada National Security Site, which you saw the slide that encompasses, you know, the places that I deal with are Los Alamos, Livermore, Santa Barbara, Sandia, are the folks that we work with hand in hand with the laboratories to bring the work to the Nevada test site, because that is where you could say the rubber hits the road. Because, you know, if your experiments don't work, it's not a good day. Scientists don't like it when they don't get data. And so it was our responsibilities to always get not only the best data, but always get the data. And that's not always a trivial matter sometimes. And so what you see here is a picture of a group of people that are part of one of the subcrits. It's not the first one, but it was one later on, the Vega, which is much down the road, and we'll talk about some of that. But what you see here is you see accumulation of people, not just MSTS or subcontractors, but you also see laboratory people, you see miners, crafts, everybody. And when you're down there working on these experiments, you can't tell one person from the other. And if you had a chance to go into the museum, you know, some of the comments is that when people were doing tests, it was the same way. You always worked hand in hand. Nobody knows who worked for who, but the whole idea was to, hey, let's solve these problems so we can get the best data that we could. So my whole thought process of being up here is to highlight our workforce. Our workforce is world class in my mind. And the primary thing is that we work with the laboratories on a day-to-day basis. They depend on us. And I will kind of highlight a couple of what I feel are transformal diagnostics that we've done at the test site that kind of what brought the real work back to the test site, and what to me has sparked this increase in our test beds and the need for additional testing here in Nevada, along with the people from Los Alamos, Livermore, Sandia, and especially Santa Barbara. So let's go on to the next slide. And so can we go on to the next slide after that, please? And the next slide after that? I know I only have a few minutes and I don't want to go through all these slides. So one of the things when I talk about transformational diagnostics is you see here is we have been working with Amy Lewis in New Mexico, very bright lady, that we are developing cameras, special cameras. Everything we do is in a unique manner when it comes to our diagnostics. It's not like you can just go out to Kmart and buy a camera and use it. No, we have to develop our own chips. They have to be fast, extremely fast. And we want to be able to take pictures, because one of the things that we've learned, and as you probably all know, is, you know, pictures tell 1,000 words. And people understand pictures and movies much better than, you know, if you just give them a data point. One data point on a scope doesn't tell them much. But if you can give them pictures at various times, or even movies, you're talking about millions of pieces of data that gives a little bit better explanation of the physics that are going on. And so, and the thing that we want to look at, and we're going to talk about that here in 1 second, is when we used to do underground nuclear testing, most of our diagnostics were on the outside. It measured the effects of the nuclear device going off. We don't have that privilege anymore, and so we have developed a method in how to look at, well, what goes on in a nuclear weapon when you have a sphere and it implodes. And we have been able to take our diagnostics from the outside and move them inside to see what is the physics of the materials happening as it implodes, as well as we are able to take pictures at various times through this process. And I think that's where the transformational diagnostics that we hear from the test site, and I talk about the test site, I'm talking about MSTS and our previous contractors, the diagnostics that we've been able to produce and field along with the laboratories. Let's go on to the next slide, please. So part of that is, if you look on the left side, is what we call a PDB probe. It's a photo Doppler velocimetry probe. And this is what allows us to be able to look inside of a sphere. And when I talk about a sphere, it's the sphere that's inside of a nuclear device. It's what actually gets imploded that actually generates the nuclear chain reaction. To the right of that is what we call a lens system, and it's about 4 feet in length, and it's used to take pictures. And it's in a box that's about 6 to 8 feet in diameter, and each one of those elements is movable, so you can adjust it, because every experiment is unique, so we have to make adjustments, and so that allows us to do it. It's about, I would say, that lens system on the right it's on the order, if you just go out and buy all the pieces and parts, is well over $200,000, and that's not much. But it's the millions of dollars of effort that the people had to do to design, build, test, to make sure that that thing gives the best picture quality that we can give them. Let's go on to the next slide, please. I can't see the slide, so I have to. It's one thing about not bringing your glasses, right, and the thing's so far away. How much time do I have? I know I'm only supposed to give 10 minutes. So see, these are some of the pictures of those optical probes. And so when I talk about a sphere, is the one that says where it's a fisheye probe, that's the piece that you have a sphere, you have a very small hole in the bottom that comes in and comes up inside, so it allows us to send about 150 to 200 laser beams at various points on the sphere. And what happens is, it's like a radar detector. It measures the speed. And so what happens is that when this thing encapsulates or shrinks, it's coming down, it starts to measure in millions of points of how that thing implodes. Well, when you have a sphere that's imploding and you take millions of data sets, this thing's coming down and shrinking in just microseconds, is now you can go back and you can make a movie. It's not just one, but now you're able to make a picture to see how it comes, and you can rotate it around, with all of our, awesome computers and software, and you can see how it just fluctuates, because it doesn't come down symmetrically. So it gives the physicist a better feel for what's going on inside. And this was the multi-velocity photo Doppler velocimetry, the multiple photo Doppler velocimetry was one of those transformational diagnostics that now the laboratories were getting thousands of data that they never got before. Now it made our experiments at the test site, if you look on a cost per data basis, something that they really liked, and they could start saying, hey, it's a benefit to be at the test site. That's when our underground testing really took off. Along with, let's go to the next page. Thought I had a picture. I don't. The next page, well, what you're going to see here is other diagnostics that we have around. But the other diagnostic that I feel was instrumental in U1A is radiography. And we have a Cygnus machine that's down there that actually takes 2 pictures of an imploding sphere at various times and at various areas that gives them a picture. And radiography has become one of the primary diagnostics. And that has been the future for our test bed that we're building currently underground that we're going to talk about, which is Scorpius as we go on. What I also wanted to highlight here is still the people. You can see the people here, they're around different diagnostics, different platforms. You've got Jasper, we have our launcher, we have our multi-velocity diagnostics there. You see a picture in the lower left-hand corner of U1A. That's the tower that takes you underground, which is about 1,000 feet, 900 feet underground. Very cool place, very cool place. What's that? All right, I'm sorry, we've got to move. So let's go on to page 15, please. So what does this all mean? So 25, and this is what we're going to talk with Joel, is we have two test beds that we're developing in U1A right now. One is called Scorpius, which is a larger pulse power machine. And this is a linear pulse power accelerator, but you're able to chop the pulse, and you'll be able to take pictures at different times on a linear in a linear mode. And what this does is you can take pictures at any given time during the implosion. During, at the beginning, the middle, the end, wherever the area of interest is. And that is going to be a huge test bed that we have got going on down in U1A. The other one is that we have a neutron diagnostic called Zeus that we're putting a neutron generator down there, and we're going to do what we call neutron reactivity measurements, and where we're going to have our device that implodes, we're going to bombard it with neutrons, and we're going to see a very small reaction. I know, 2 seconds. I'm being told to get yanked off, so, I told you, get me started, sorry. It's a small chain reaction. They're going to start and they're going to measure those little neutrons that come off the device, not what we put in, but off. Very delicate, very hard, but very excitable, because we're going from a static test to more of a dynamic test. Thank you very much.
Hi, good evening. I'm Darcie Dennis-Koller. I was given the honor of explaining how we're going to shift gears just a little bit. So Gene told us a lot about what we do at the NNSS to understand how our stockpile functions and how it works. And I'm going to talk a little bit about how we understand if other people are trying to develop a nuclear weapon. And so we obviously don't want this. And so we have a lot of efforts in place to try and understand what level of maturity or what people are up to. So can you switch to, I think you need to go down a few slides. Right here. Go to the next one. Okay. So first, I wanted to explain what is defense nuclear nonproliferation. That's what we call it. Defense nuclear nonproliferation is, if you read in the little blue box here, actually I think I got a laser pointer, I can point to it. Yes. This is what you would find on the website for the NNSA, that we are all about preventing nuclear weapons proliferation and reducing the threat of nuclear and radiological terrorism around the world. So what does that mean? How do we do it? Well, there's 3 pieces. There's a policy piece. This happens mostly in Washington. This is all your NNSA people and your policy people saying, telling other countries, we don't want you doing these things because developing a nuclear weapon is not something we want you to do. And we do, as the science, as the people with expertise, we do sometimes play a role here when the policy people need to ask us a technical question, right? They need to be backed up by science at some level. The second piece that we do is support and training. How do we support and train the governing bodies in the world for how you track if somebody's moving nuclear material around, or how do you look for somebody not telling you the truth about what their program is, and things like that. The IAEA spends a lot of time with other countries teaching them how you put in portal monitors and things like this to monitor trucks driving through to see if somebody's smuggling maybe nuclear material. And then a big piece that we participate here at the NNSS is in the research and development. So I've drawn this picture up here about what is proliferation. Horizontal proliferation is about the process of getting to a nuclear weapon. So first, you need some special nuclear material. So you have to get materials. So we look for and we study how are people developing material. Now you may also develop that material because you want to make energy. Nuclear energy, you may have a reactor. So we want to be able to tell the difference between, are you making the material for a reactor, are you moving the material for a reactor, or do you have other intents and purposes? The next thing you might need is a weapons design. So we look for, do you have material and are you getting to a design? And then you want to test it. So we all know that if somebody goes out and does a full-scale test, we're going to see it. Right? If you take a nuclear weapon out anywhere on the face of the earth and test it, everybody's going to see it. So there are a lot of subsystem tests that you may want to do before you do that big test. We want to be to the left here. We want to see everybody getting up to that sooner rather than later. Vertical proliferation is about the maturity. So we look for vertical proliferation. We look to see, do you have a design or do you have a really more advanced design. So I put some pictures on here on the right side to kind of show what I mean. Here's our picture of Fat Man, which I think there's a replica of outside. Here had this device called the Gadget. This was our very first one that we did in the United States, developed at Los Alamos, tested in southern New Mexico. And then over the years, we progressed and we got up to here where this is a picture of a hydrogen bomb test, much, much larger in scale. And so we're looking for this kind of space. The problem that we face today is that we assume, and sometimes we assume, that people would follow our same path in maturity. We start with a device down here and we go up to here to something more advanced with lots of tests. 1,000 tests were done out at the test site to get us to this place. But there's a lot of emerging technology. So I drew this little arrow here, because this is how I think of it. Emerging technology kind of lets you cross-cut. So if you can use new and modern novel chemistry and physics techniques, or high-performance computing, or advanced manufacturing, these are some of the things that we're looking for. So this is all the stuff that you look for when you're doing defense nuclear nonproliferation, is to see if somebody's up to creating a nuclear weapon. So go to the next one. And I'll show a couple things that we do at the NNSS to support this. So one thing we want to understand is nuclear explosion monitoring. Now, when people are being covert, they don't produce yield because we can measure yield. So it's not a real nuclear test. It's really an explosion that you're testing in various ways. And we want to see if we can understand things about the explosion without the nuclear test. So we call this program the low yield nuclear monitoring. So we're looking for tests being done that are just explosions, really. So this is a big one. This is a huge test bed we have out at the Nevada test site. It's in this picture on the left. This is it's underground. There'll be a detonation of HE underground, and all across the mountains here, and you can see this little airplane up here. All across the mountains, we have sensors and detectors to see if we can start to distinguish for ourselves what this explosion signature looks like underground. And so this is what the cavity looks like. You can imagine a very small man or woman walking down this here into this big cavity. And this tiny red box represents 18 metric tons of HE. This is actually relatively large. It's about 8 pallets stacked up. So this is a pretty big test. And so we want to see what we can see on the outside. Similarly, we want to know if we can distinguish these underground explosions from just an earthquake. Can we tell with seismic monitors if we can tell the difference between underground explosions and earthquakes? So we do this series of experiments called source physics experiment. So we dig a hole down into the earth and we detonate very large charges of HE, and we look to see if we can tell the difference between that and the signature from an earthquake. And in this case, at the NNSS, we have a lot of places where we can compare this to actual earthquakes. We can actually do a direct comparison, which is what we're working on right now, where we've measured an earthquake in the same spot many, many times over and over, and we're going to use that data to compare to when we dig a hole down there. Unfortunately, it's 7,000 feet deep, so this is pretty heavy-duty work for us. It's really hard to dig a straight hole 7,000 feet deep. We specialize in that out at the NNSS. So you can go to the next slide. We also build other kinds of flexible test beds. In this case, we want to look for manufacturing things. We've got a couple of ventures that look for manufacturing and subsystem tests. If you're doing small tests of pieces of your system, what might you do? And so one example is a test bed we're building that's a building, and we can test our own selves, our scientists. We can go in there and we can look at the emanations that come out. So if you put manufacturing equipment in there, something new, something of that cross-cutting nature I was talking about, some advanced manufacturing technique. We put these tools in there and then we see what emanations we can measure. So this is another way we can learn to distinguish the signatures that we're looking for. Go to the next one, please. All right, so it all culminates in codes. Mark talked about the codes. We want to get left of boom is what we always call it. So I showed you that picture of our horizontal proliferation, and it ends with a big old nuclear test. We want to be left in time. We want to find out before you do a whole nuclear test. So that's what we're looking for, and that really requires our hydrocodes. So we have test beds. This is UNA that Gene talked about. And we use this as a test bed. We have instruments all around the mountains and all out here, and we look at our own facilities and see what the signatures and the emanations might be from those facilities. And then we build codes to simulate the work that's happening in there and what the emanation we would expect to see. So go to the next one. And lastly, it comes down to the workforce again. So one of the ways that we increase the nuclear security is by training and supporting people. So when you build test beds and you do this kind of research, people naturally gain experience and expertise. And they are the people that our policymakers and our agencies like the IAEA lean on for how they should proceed. What should we do? We see some things happening, and so one of the things we do is we just reduce the amount of nuclear material available to people to use. And so I put a picture of Belarus up here because we did that in Belarus this year. It moves around, but this year we helped some people at the University of Minsk just get rid of a bunch of radiological material that they had. We take that sometimes, and sometimes we give them alternative ways to do the work that they were doing without using the radiological materials. So that's it, expert workforce and sustained enabling infrastructure. That is really what we are about out at the NNSS, because with expert workforce and sustained infrastructure, you can enable foreign partners to reduce S&M that's available globally. You can train the IAEA and other people what to look for when they're looking. And we can provide equipment that monitors. So we can provide things like these portal monitors. So that's it for DNA.
All right, so my name is Alexis Reed. I'm a nuclear engineer by training. I've been here about 14 years, and the only thing I know how to do is respond to nuclear incidents. My colleagues probably don't know this, but we have an informal competition as who has the best job around here, and I win. So you're going to get to listen to a little bit about how fun it is to respond to incidents, how to wake up every day. You don't necessarily know what you might be asked to do. It's a great career here, and I'll tell you a little bit about who specifically we are and where we operate out of. So you've seen a little bit on the maps during this presentation of our locations. Where we respond to nuclear incidents as part of the NNSS infrastructure are at what are known as the remote sensing laboratories, and we have 2 of those. One is on Nellis Air Force Base, and the other is at Joint Base Andrews. We are conveniently split kind of across the country in order to be able to kind of split that response area and effectively respond from both sides of the U.S. We are a high-tech STEM employer, recruiting engineering majors, physicists. We also have a large logistical component, as you can imagine, to get out and respond to incidents such as Fukushima, as Mark mentioned. But at these 2 locations, what we're actually doing is fielding the national level nuclear response capabilities. You may have heard of the term NEST. I think it appears in some Transformers movies and some other things of this nature. I actually took a photo at Disney World recently with a NEST employee outside of the Transformers ride. That was cool. But the nuclear emergency support teams, that's what we're supporting out of these 2 locations. So I'll show you some cool pictures and you can kind of get a feel for what we actually are able to do. We do support the full spectrum of radiological nuclear incidents out of our locations, but we specialize in what's known as public health and safety. So I'll mention kind of what that entails here and what types of amazing equipment and people we have that allow us to respond to those types of incidents. We also do extensive international outreach, so we have international visitors coming right here to Nevada all the time. I have a group coming out of the European Union next week to be able to collaborate with us. As you can imagine, this is a need to be able to respond to these types of incidents that's mirrored in a lot of different countries. They do see us as subject matter experts, and they come here and we help them and also collaborate and learn some things from our international partners. So that's happening quite frequently as well. Next slide. All right, so the remote sensing laboratories, we actually originated from the need to track radiological plumes during weapons testing. Back in around 1960, we actually were initially called ARMS, the Aerial Radiological Measuring Systems. So our lineage really comes from aerial monitoring, and you'll see that theme has really continued on up until right now, where we're getting brand new, highly equipped aircraft that are positioned here and at our other location. We later became known as the Aerial Measurements Office, and we were actually located at McCarran Airport. And then we moved to Nellis Air Force Base in 1989. We're very privileged to have a space there and be supported by the Air Force for our deployments. You can see there in the lower right the military aircraft that deployed our personnel to Fukushima. Obviously, it's very handy out there at Nellis to have a ramp. I believe we're the only air-conditioned hangar west of the Mississippi. It's a very nice facility out there. And then in 1976, the bicentennial events in Washington, D.C. really created the need for us to have a mirrored capability out in the Washington, D.C. area. And so that's when we stood up that facility at Joint Base Andrews. Back then it was Andrews Air Force Base. Since then it's become a joint base, and it was actually known as WAMO, the Washington Aerial Measurements Office. And now our two locations, we are the home to a number of the U.S. government's NEST teams, and you'll get to see some cool pictures of those folks that actually do that mission outside of the Jack Ryan novel. So let's go next. So our response capabilities, we are national level teams for radiological monitoring, right? Teams that can go out, we can field instrumentation, we can conduct analyses in order to make an assessment in an emergency of what needs to happen. So I have an awesome consequence management program manager who's not here today. Her name is Raja Mena. She's a UNLV graduate, and she has the best phrase. She says, we are teaching national leaders who know floods, fires, and hurricanes what to do when we're talking about REMS, RADs, and RINCANs, right? What happens when what you know has that radiological component, which becomes the unknown, something you can't see or smell or taste, and how do we deal with the consequences just to keep people safe? That's what we specialize in. We do also provide support to law enforcement for large-scale events. So we do go to the Super Bowl, but not really the Super Bowl. Sounds really fun, but after a few years of that, people say, hey, I'd like to actually watch the game, and so we rotate the staff. We do also support things like Las Vegas New Year's Eve, which is a huge special event from a DHS, Department of Homeland Security perspective. perspective due to the large number of people, right, that are in a small area. And if someone wanted to do something nasty, that might be an opportunity to do so just because of the large numbers of people that are concentrated in one place. We do also support presidential inaugurations, the Boston Marathon, the event that occurred there with just explosives actions. Obviously, there were some questions about what if, right? What if there had been a radiological component during that disaster? How would we have responded? And so since then, we've gone out to support that event from an aerial monitoring capability. We do aerial monitoring via plane and helicopter. We are, as far as I know, the only dedicated aerial radiological response capability worldwide. So we have dedicated aircraft, dedicated pilot and mechanic staff. We work extensively with similar capabilities worldwide, so I think with pretty good confidence I can say we're the only one, that the United States is the only country that has a dedicated capability, and we're the ones that have the pleasure of fielding that out of our 2 locations. As of 2021, we actually brought back a regional team that was out of commission for about 5 years, came back in 2021 to ensure that we have a regional response capability here as well. So any event that occurs in Clark County or the surrounding areas, we have a team right out here at Nellis equipped and ready to respond to those smaller scale events. Prior to that, you would be looking at a regional team that would come out of California, but instead now we've ensured we have that regional response right here in Clark County as well. Next slide. So let's talk about the aircraft. These are the YouTube stars of the NES capabilities. You can Google low-flying helicopters in Houston and see some really interesting footage of our teams providing response capabilities for the Super Bowl that was held there. Same thing, we got some great publicity from a YouTube filmer from this latest Super Bowl in LA. As you can imagine, we're flying patterns that people are not used to seeing from a helicopter, very low and slow with high fidelity radiation sensors that for this platform are actually mounted externally in pods, and so they garner a lot of attention. So we do have 2 Bell 412 helicopters, typically 1 positioned at each of our locations, and then we also have 3 Beechcraft King Air B350 extended range airplanes, brand new in 2019. They're beautiful. The previous aircraft were about 30 years old. So these are very, very nice, and flying right out of our Nellis location as well as Andrews. Next. We did deploy to Fukushima about 35 personnel for around 60 days, standing up a home team capability right here out of our Nellis facility 24/7, 365 for that entire time. We were requested to come out and help support actually U.S. Forces Japan initially to look at military forces that were housed there in the Japan area around Fukushima, and then of course military dependents as well to help ensure their safety. We did leverage, we took our spare equipment. We didn't take our aircraft over there. We took our spare equipment and we married up with 2 different units right there at Yokota Air Base and flew up to 3 aircraft per day, 85 flights, 507 flight hours. That map that's really popular in health physics articles and whatnot was actually created by our scientists, our geographic information systems experts, right there side by side with the Japanese capability that basically mirrors what we do here. So great claim to fame right there that map was created by people right here in Las Vegas. We did also send out ground monitoring teams. As you can see from those pictures, it wasn't that pleasurable. They had just had a giant natural disaster, an earthquake, roads were cracked and these types of things, but ground monitoring is essential in order to calibrate all that aerial monitoring that's happening. So we did send out teams for quite a long time to take some ground level measurements in order to create that data set that you see there in the upper right. Next. All right, so what does this mean for Nevada? And we've kind of touched on this a little bit today, but obviously you have the rapid national level response capability sitting right here. Should there be an issue, we are obviously a large metropolitan area. We have large events. We now have these large sports teams. All of these types of things, you have this deployable capability sitting right here. We're also fulfilling, professional positions, right? Supporting national security, including internships, recruiting from universities here to fill some high-tech STEM PM positions. And then we also are able to create these aerial baseline surveys. You can see a map there in the lower right that shows a background map that we conduct over the Las Vegas Strip in advance of Las Vegas New Year's Eve every year. So working right there alongside Metro Armor and trying to ensure the safety, right, of our own neighbors right here. So that's kind of what we provide, and hopefully that gave you a little bit of a look into what we do. All right, thank you.
All right, so my name is Joel Leeman. You heard a little bit about what my area is, and all of these folks are doing the mission work, and they need the infrastructure to be able to do the mission work. So it all starts with them, but then we have to get in front of them to provide the infrastructure so that they can then come in and conduct that mission. It's a really hard thing to do, but it's an exciting thing to do. So if you go to my first slide, what Mark referred to as the busy slide, it's busy because we're really busy. And I only have 4 slides, and I'll be very brief, but I'm telling you what he indicated earlier about that dip and the U-shaped curve. What we're going to see, what we're going to see is that we've been ramping up, and it's continuing to go up. That's our challenge here. I've got about 11 years now working on my 12th in Nevada, and the challenge whenever I came here was, what are we going to do? We don't have enough budget. Are we going to close down facilities? Where are we going? Our challenge today is, how are we going to do all the work that we have? How are we going to build these new test beds? How are we going to get the workforce to come out and do these exciting things that we want to do? So I feel very fortunate. I get to represent another different part of the site, but it's a part of the site, it's the engineers, okay? It's the project managers, it's the procurement specialists, it's the craft, it's the people that are running the equipment, that are building and keeping this place alive. And so it's a very big responsibility. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you about it. This chart here, if you look at it, it kind of touches on the areas that you heard. On the upper right-hand side, it speaks to what Darcie was discussing, some of the underground capabilities. We're in the process of mining out there to put those test beds in. If you go down and around, you get to what Gene Hunt was talking about, which is over in the left-hand lower corner there. He was talking to you about the underground at UNA. So just to give you an understanding, we do everything out there from, okay, something that Gene brought up, which he was kind of talking about the accelerator underground. It's bigger than a football field long, okay? So you got to understand how big this thing is, and it's got to go underground, and it's 1,000 feet underground, okay? So think about that. Think about trying to make that happen. That's before you get into the technology. Just to open the cavity that you need to put in there, much less the air that needs to go down there, the water that needs to go down there, the power that needs to go down there. So we have then some things in the upper left-hand corner there, which really speak to what we're trying to do with the workforce. I love the fact that you heard about the workforce. We can't have the future workforce coming out and living in trailers and trying to do their work in trailers or in really old stuff. So our job is to try to get that in a position, support these new missions, make this place good for another 50, 60, 70 years. That's the job. If you go to the next slide, this just gives you a little idea, part of our basic strategy. On the left-hand side of that slide, you see a picture of the site. And it shows you 3 different types. We break up the infrastructure. We think about mission facilities. That's like UNA that we just discussed. We think about critical site infrastructure. That's what Mark said when he ran down water, power, okay, IT, comm, roads. That's how you get to these places, how they're serviced, how they can actually operate. And then we have what we call support infrastructure. It's facilities like this, where you have administrative spaces, people where they have to work every day and try to do their jobs. So collectively, we balance between those things. And what you see there in that gray shaded area on the site is what we call the mission corridor. So we are consolidating the infrastructure at the site. Remember, the technology that we need that used to be gigantic has gotten much, much smaller. So we don't need the massive sprawling infrastructure that used to be there or required in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. We're now going way smaller than that. So that heat map is trying to show you the investments that we have in the infrastructure within that area and at the other sites to enable us to go ahead and meet the requirements of the missions for the next 50, 60, 70 years. On the right, you see some examples of what's going on with the UNA complex underground. Again, you're talking about people that come to work and they go underground 1,000 feet and they work all day to make this happen. Okay, so it's a very unique environment, and we have other places where it's high explosives capabilities. We've got things that are a wide variety, but they all need the infrastructure to work, to be safe, to be secure. Next slide. This just illustrates a little bit of what we're doing. You see across the top what we call the critical site infrastructure. So that's the utilities. That's how we keep this place operating, okay? You can't have any of these unique mission capabilities work if you don't get power to them. And it's got to be reliable power. So these are just examples of what we're doing. Many of those things are happening now. They were ideas 10 years ago, 5 years ago. They're coming up out of the ground now. They're replacing some of the stuff that was put in the ground 50, 60 years ago. Down below, you see the support infrastructure. That's really some of the facilities, the new things we're putting out there to enable this workforce. They have a place where they're permanent new facilities. It's like this building here, okay? We want facilities that attract that younger, earlier career workforce and that enable them to do their work. We can't have them in rundown facilities. Okay, last slide. So I only put this in here because we're really pushing on this, our strategy that drives into our planning. We execute and we deliver. Our job is to get the stuff in place for everybody else to be able to do their work. You see that chart over on the right? There's kind of a mountain there. What you see in gold is really the construction type activities. And I know it's small, but on the far side of that, it's 2011. And if you go out to the right, it's 2028. But what you see there is the massive ramp up that Mark talked to you about earlier. So we're about halfway through that ramp up. So our challenge today, which is exciting and it's challenging, keep getting up that ramp. Our job is to put those things in place that you heard about. That blue line that you see going up there, it's really the increase in operations and the mission work that's taking place. So my focus is on getting the place in shape so that we can stabilize it and use it for the next 50, 60, 70 years and enable that blue line to go up so that the labs and other users and our own workforce, our technical people, have a place to go, safe, secure, compliant, but effective and productive. That's really the message. That's what we do. And so that's infrastructure. I know it's super exciting, right?
By the way, the I word I was trying to get for Joel is innovative.
Can we give another round of applause to our incredible speakers this evening? And I hope this gave you a real insight into the current projects that are going on today at the Nevada National Security Site. As you can tell, it's not just something that is here in Nevada, but nationwide. And so with that being said, I'd love to open it up for questions for our panelists this evening. Does anybody have any questions for them?
What did you say the overall budget was for all this work?
So our budget this year is $820 million.
Yes. One of the issues these days is there's a potential for nuclear proliferation everywhere these days. And I was wondering if you're doing any equipment development for doing that via drones, like out at Creech Air Force Base type drones. You can fly over Ukraine or anywhere else to see what's going on.
Can you hear me? Well, I'll just speak louder. We don't have those kind of drones that they have out at Creech. What we do is develop the instruments that you would use to detect things. So if our military wants to mount them on drones that they're flying out of Creech,
okay.
then yeah.
They're small enough to put on a drone.
We work very hard to make them small and useful, and deliver the kind of information that we want to know. So it depends on what you're trying to measure.
And is there any way you can detect development work at various sites, let's say enrichment capabilities?
We look for enrichment capabilities if people are trying to enrich. And that's why I drew the picture with the cross-cutting emerging technologies. Because what if, we're not looking for the kind of enrichment capabilities that we used when we were enriching? So what if we're not looking for that? What if we're looking for something more modern or new? So we try to discover those things as well.
So is there ways to do, like they might be doing chemical enrichment as opposed to other?
Sure, we stay very current in the literature. All of our scientists are chemists and physicists and engineers, and yes. So we make
Okay.
sure we know
So you have a radiochemistry capability and
stay current with what's possible.
very good.
That's important.
This is also for Dr. Darcie. You kept referring to HE in your presentation.
I'm sorry.
I didn't know what that was.
High explosives. See, this is my problem. I talk in acronyms too much. So apologies. Yes, high
Yeah,
explosives.
people are probably pretty surprised we're talking about helium, so.
Yeah, I wasn't talking about helium. That's right. So apologies. No, I was
Nope,
referring
no
to
problem.
high explosives.
Okay, thank you.
Detonations.
This is John. Mark, and your whole team, great presentation. Just what are your greatest challenges? You'd say the top 5 of the next 5 years. What are the biggest 5 challenges you face to meet these very challenging national security missions?
So we have 5 people here. I'll let Joel go first and just tell us, each one of you pick one.
For me, it's, in this area, it's people combined with supply chain. Our ability to go get this work done is the ramp up. And keeping those people and the distance we are from town and the market capability, the market conditions that are here, it's really hard to compete and get them to come out and stay out and work with us. That's the challenge, biggest challenge that we have.
So I hate to repeat, but I would say, maintaining our expert workforce is always our biggest challenge, right? Maintaining people that we have invested significant time and effort into training, getting the appropriate clearances that they need to be able to do our work, and then, keeping them engaged in executing a job that, at least in my area, requires a significant personal investment, right? I didn't really go into details on this, but we're asking people to be on call 24/7, 365, to be within, 2 hours of our home base and be ready to deploy anywhere on a moment's notice, right? It's a huge personal commitment that we're asking as well. So we need highly technical people willing to make this huge personal commitment for the mission, and trying to maintain that workforce is something we're always trying to get better at.
So I'm going to say people too. It's not going to be a surprise, but anytime you have an increased workload like this, like what we do in defense nuclear nonproliferation and the growth of these test beds, it does require a lot of people. And then, as you said, looking out 5 years, it isn't really just about, for us, it isn't just about making sure we get the test bed built, although that's critically important. And I'll let Joel worry about that the most. But we worry about it together, getting the test bed built. But after the test bed is built, we need to still maintain the scientists and the physicists and the researchers, and we need to know who those are. And actually, our chief scientist is in our audience tonight, Jose, and he worries about that a lot too. What scientists do we need in the future, and 10 years from now, 20 years from now? And so what is the right size for us? So we do worry about that a lot, and finding those people willing to make the commitment to this work.
So Joel and Alexis and Darcie said that we need people, and all I can stand up and say is that we need more people. Not only people, but we need the technical expertise. And as we move into new areas, as like accelerators, finding those people that have the talent and the education is very difficult. We compete with our customers, for those people. And it is not only finding them, but it's keeping them, making sure they're happy. And it has been a battle, and as you can see, we're accelerating, and it's just going to be a bigger battle.
So it's going to be a clean sweep. It's people, but I'm gonna pivot this a little bit. When I first, I come from Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory, and so I came out here about 5 years ago, and I was shocked when I started to talk to people. They said, "What do you do?" I said, "Well, I run the Nevada test site." They said, "What's that?" I said, "Where did you grow up?" "Here in Nevada, here in Vegas." And so the key thing for us is what I found when I got here is we were Yucca Mountain and mushroom clouds. I am trying to change the narrative, and I think we've been pretty successful, that we are no longer mushroom clouds. You heard that. We do, we don't do nuclear explosions, but we do some really, really cool science. You got to see some of it. And some of the spin-off technologies are just truly remarkable. How can I get into the kids today? I'm old enough, the kids, anybody under 30, I guess is a kid to me now. No, but I'm really talking about early, maybe even the K-8, into the elementary schools. We have to do a better job of encouraging STEM, getting the kids to like science, like math. I think we are capable of doing that by showing the cool work that we do, but we have to build that next generation, and we need better name recognition. So I appreciate the Test Museum for helping us there. We're pushing on trying to get the modern stockpile stewardship mission better represented. The supercomputing work that we do, they're at exascale now. I mean, and who knows where they'll be next, or quantum computing and things that they're looking at. There is such cool work that's being done in the NNSA if we could just simply get it out to the people. So, yeah, it's people, but I'm going to pivot on it a little bit and saying we have to do a better job. One of our biggest challenges is attracting that next generation. I can go work for Google. I remember recruiting one time, and, I think, I'll pick on some aerospace, Northrop, Grumman. They had a flight simulator there. I couldn't attract a kid to come over and talk to me. He wanted to go play in the flight simulator. But on the other hand, if we start showing some of these experiments that we're doing, some of the explosions, some of the shock breakout experiments and things like that, it blows their mind, and they love what we're doing. So that would be my answer. Still people, but a little bit different.
Oh, okay. I have a question on, we called it Ladue, it's now U1A1, I think, on our stockpile. We used to periodically take weapons out of the stockpile and test them. Are you actually taking the weapons like to the DAF project out there and taking them apart and using the material from the pits in these tests to find out the condition of the material? If you can answer that, maybe it's classified now, I don't know. But, and also, are you able to do thermonuclear weapons and testing in the same manner or at Ladue? And are you thinking of using maybe the tunnels for your 300-foot football field size? Because that was so much more practical, I thought, at the originality of it when they started Ladue. It seemed like a good idea.
There was Ladue, and then there was Redo, right? Probably didn't know that part. Anyway, the testing that we do looks at all the different materials that go into a nuclear device. And one of those is to look at old plutonium versus new plutonium in terms of the manufacturing. And we do tests at various locations to look at the material properties associated with materials that are pulled out of old devices or materials that have been sitting on the shelf that those were made out of, and whether the pits were made at Kansas City or any other place. And we look at our new manufacturing capabilities, and we test those, and we do comparison testing. And it's not just on those materials, but all the materials that go in there, because, you know, we have these new methods where we can do, you know, manufacturing of materials using these printers, right? High-speed printers, and they're getting used more and more to where they can make parts out of special materials. And so they're always doing these material property studies just to see how it relates to the old stuff, how the new stuff is working. Now, when it comes to thermals, I couldn't tell you because I don't know.
Just jump in here real quickly on this. I mean, clearly the surveillance projects continue on. I mean, the surveillance work is going on, and so, as Gene said, we're able to pull old material out. Now, if you stop and think of why is that important, okay? If you look at the current pit manufacturing schedule, how old will the oldest pit be before it gets refreshed? That defines the age of plutonium that we need to understand. And so we have to be, not only look at what is currently and what is old stuff, there's nothing old enough out there. And so we have to be creative in ways of trying to come up with ways to artificially age stuff. The second thing is that the NIF facility at Livermore is focused on the secondary side of things, the thermonuclear side of things. And so they're doing some great work there. And so that might be a place I'd point you to answer that second part of your question.
Thank you guys so much for coming out. I do have a question regarding staffing. Is there a place for future workforce or even current workforce that are in the humanities or social sciences for a position with the NNSS or within the complex?
Everybody's going to look my direction on that one. There always is room. I mean, it's not. I'll be honest with you, it's not a huge demand, but there are places where that kind of skill set, that kind of thinking, is important to us. As we organize ourselves, as we deal with people, and as we try to grow and develop people, and so there's another whole other side of this. Remarkably, scientists, engineers, and technologists are people like anybody else, and so we have to deal with what I'd call the softer science skills, and there are places, and there's a demand for that kind of. It's not going to be at the same level as some of the other technical things. So, fair enough.
This question would be for Joel on the infrastructure. How can you guarantee a stable electrical supply given our national grid issues and intermittent generation and on and on?
Hey, luckily this is a pretty easy one, okay? No, it's not easy. There's a couple things going on. So first of all, we have a couple different feeds coming into the site, so we don't rely on one feed. And it's very important for us to have that. Then we distribute that across the site in a way where we get additional redundancy. So we try to set the system up so that if we have a problem, if we have a failure, we still have a way to provide power, or we quickly fix it. But to your point, one of the things we are looking at now is to try to see if our abundant sun and wind can take us off the grid. If some of this technology will allow us to store energy at these various remote facilities so that we want to have the power lined up, but if we don't have it or something happens, here we go. So that's really the longer term answer, is to figure out how to reduce the size of the system down, make it far more reliable, and then go with the next technology to enable us not to have to hope that NV energy or the rates for power, okay, are something that we can handle. That's really where we're going. We do have, in fact, it's funny that you mentioned that, we have a distinction for the NNSA, for the whole enterprise, where we created just 2 years ago, we were the first ones to have what they call a net zero facility. We have an existing fire station that has to work 24 hours a day for obvious reasons. And we put a solar farm out there, and it is working today and is powering that up. So that was the first building that ever was net zero. That it didn't use energy, right? We had the ability to negate that. We've built new facilities, and then the next distinction we had is we have the first newly constructed facility that does the same thing. So you have to build the facilities a certain way so that they're lower energy to begin with, certain materials, design, etc. But the reality is those buildings that you saw on my chart, we're building those so that all of those are really high-performing facilities and can be offset by generation at the site.
Just got to chime in on the importance of that question. If you're in many of our remote areas, whatever took the power out when the power goes out probably prevents you from getting there to supply additional power. So what Joel is talking about is incredibly important to us, especially when we try to support Darcie's work in some of these very remote areas. So good question.
Okay, I have a question about mini micro reactors. And are you guys going to be involved with the testing thereof for mini micro reactors now that they're looking at reactors you can put on a truck and deliver to a site, bury them in the ground for 30 years and operate them? I was at an event a few years ago where the commander of Creech was saying he really would want one immediately because they can't go down even if there's a national cyber takedown of our grid for 6 months or something. He wants to keep it going. And if you're looking at testing those out there, are you looking at maybe putting one in the ground at the site to operate the site indefinitely in case of a permanent power outage?
There's different kinds of these small reactors. And so I think the one that you're talking about that you bury down in the ground and it operates, it's kind of autonomous for 30 years. It's really it's a lower power. It's a low power. Right. We haven't in the past here studied nuclear reactors. It's usually with Idaho National Laboratory. It's an Office of Science type of work. But the answer is that we are trying to actually start to use some of those, especially like Mark was talking about. Some of these very large test beds that I showed are in a really remote area. It's a 2-hour drive from here to get out there. And so for Joel, that becomes an increasingly difficult infrastructure problem. He's bringing power in, and water and all of that, and then it's very remote. So it does have some advantages for us trying in places like that. So it's probably something we will do as a partnership with our Office of Science labs to test it out and see if we can get off the grid and do things like that.
Setting up a test bed so that you can run a new reactor through every day, test it to send to an Air Force base or something.
Perhaps. I mean, that's out there in the future.
Yeah, that would be something that we might consider. The person that's probably best I'll point you to is Jose. Raise your hand there. We've been kicking around this idea of small modular reactors for a while. Creech would love us to be able to help them with that. To what degree we might get into this, I don't know. But remember, the 800-pound gorilla is not small modular reactors. It's the current work that we do, and we would never be willing to threaten that.
Do we have any other questions here at the museum? Okay.
What, if anything, does Area 51 have to do with you guys? If anything.
It causes people want to rush my site. And I wanted to put a sign out there, not here, okay? It's just, You know, it's not what we do. It's not at all. But we are routinely bothered, invaded, whatever, by somebody who is looking for it and comes onto our site. And so if you try to do that, you're going to lose your camera, you're going to be, you know, be patted down, you're going to be a lot of things, and then you'll be escorted out. If you behave yourself well, you'll be escorted out. If you misbehave, you'll probably get arrested.
I was just curious.
I'm just telling you.
Every hour, almost on the hour, you see Area 51 aircraft taking off from our air. Almost every hour.
Not mine.
So something's going on out there.
Not my airport.
Do we have any other questions here and there?
Yes, I've been involved with universities in a lot of places around the country, and a big issue for them is recruiting staff, especially top science faculty. And one issue we have here at UNLV is the not great K-12 system we have in place. And I'm sure you guys have that in spades out there at the National Nuclear Security Site. Do you have any vision of putting in your own little K-12 system out there that's top rate? And because a lot of younger faculty and the scientists you want probably want good schools for their kids, but they can't afford private schools.
Yeah, I don't think that's something we've specifically considered. You know, what we are trying to do is work with the Clark County School District out in Pahrump. If you look at news articles, you'll see that we, for example, in Pahrump, we gave them enhanced their network during the COVID when people had to remote work and stuff like that. So we're very, very interested in promoting STEM education at lower and lower levels. To put it frankly, any donations that MSTS makes are targeted at STEM. There's a lot of needs out there. I'm not saying we shouldn't be, but I'm saying we are focusing ours on STEM-related things. We're part of First Robotics. I'm a board member of that. We're big. We made sure kids could get to the, could be supported and stuff like that. We try to get our staff to be more involved. We're part of the Science Bowl. Our staff supports that, and many other things. We're working here with the museum. I think we'll be announcing a lot of interesting things, a Science on Saturday approach. We'll support buses coming here to bring kids here. Anything we can do to get kids to be more interested. My goal is that they want to do their homework. That mom and dad didn't have to tell them, but they want to do their homework. So we want to excite them. And you can see, you put some of these people up in front of them and they're going to be excited. They're going to want to be involved in science. So that's our approach, at least for now.
Do we have any other questions? And then if not, I'm going to switch over to Zoom. Our first question is, since an NNSS MSTS major challenge is people, 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 and the acquisition of talented and trained STEM staff, what might your approach to significantly improve your competitive marketing, hiring, and retention capability?
Why do I get the tough questions? Actually, we are, that's something that's in progress now. We have to be competitive salary-wise. Hopefully this isn't too pejorative, but if you think about the way we're managed, we benchmark ourselves against other companies, and you sort of find an average salary, and that's what we're benchmarked, and that's what our target salaries can be. But we want the best and the brightest. That's a non sequitur. Okay, so we're working those kind of issues. Just recently, we announced some additional benefits. These people don't know it, but we're going to next week announce something else that's going to help, try to attract people, and so we're working on that. We have you know, I'd love for Elon Musk to come in here and build a Hyperloop, you know, drive out to the test site. Unfortunately, the road to Reno is different than the road to the test site. So, you know, but you know, getting out there is an additional challenge. I did it personally for a number of years, and so I know the challenges are. So we're working on it. We're looking at it. The one thing that I would add to this is right now within the NNSA, there's tremendous support for improving this right now. It's never been this good. And so we are working with our headquarters there. When we asked recently, can we do this? They said, sure, but is that enough? But, you know, those have been in the complex for a while. Have you ever heard that? You know, so it's a good environment we're in right now, and we're working on that very issue presently. Don't have great answers all yet, but we're, you know, in a lot of ways we're trying to catch up. But you know, I kind of look at don't just catch up, but leapfrog. And so I think we have to be creative, innovative with benefits and things that will help people, attract people, and retain them.
Mark, can I add one thing to this? As an engineer myself, okay, remember we've got the highly technical side and the diagnostics, et cetera. That's a unique piece of the business. But we've also got the engineers who and the folks who figure out how to build the place. And the number one thing we can do for people is to have the work and to have steady work and to have the work there. And that's why this business of that ramp going up, people need to know that the work is there. They're going to build the place, and they want to have that exciting stuff. And we've got the opportunity with the work out there to go everything from somebody just coming out of school who can really get their teeth into some more basic engineering activities, construction activities, all the way up to some of these unique, one-of-a-kind diagnostic type activities. So I think it's the work. If we have the work there, that's the number one thing we can do. Yes, you have to pay people. You have to make it possible for them to get out to the site. But for a lot of people, they come because of the work, and the work is now there. We got to keep it there and keep it exciting.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I would point out that we're saying STEM, 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 but many of our trades are key elements of STEM. You know, you just can't get there without them. And so we don't want to lose our you know, the labor force and others. And quite honestly and frankly, you know, that there's going to be a bigger challenge in those areas. So we're trying to also work with the local unions and others to make sure there's an adequate supply of people. And one of our biggest selling points with the unions is exactly what Joel said. You can be in a rotation where you go to work for some period of time and then you go to the bottom of the list and you come back, or you can come to work for us and work for 40 years. Not a bad proposition. And so it works pretty well. Good point, Joel.
You know, Mark had mentioned earlier that we need to get the word out about the exciting work that we do out at the site. And I think that's a big piece of it too. That earlier in my career, I have been a former user of the site doing high explosive shots. A lot of studies during my career. I'm a shock and detonation physicist by training. And really what got people so excited was the work, that you can do work at the Nevada test site that you cannot do in other places. And that is true for the entire spectrum of people that Joel is talking about. It is a whole team that comes out and builds a large test bed and does a really big experiment like that. It's all the people together, and that's what's really exciting. But we need to communicate it and get people passionate about that work again.
Thank you so much. Now, can you talk about how you collaborate with UNLV on resource or student development?
I can, but I'd rather Jose talk about that since he's my guy. He's my peep. Remember I said I had peeps that do this thing? He's my guy who does this.
All right, thanks, Mark, for bringing me in and asking me tough questions. We do a lot of collaboration with the UNLV, both the College of Engineering and the College of Sciences and other schools as well. We are currently developing programs where we are funding undergraduate research experiences for undergraduates that are in their junior and senior years, where they get to go to research labs and work there. So they get a stipend from the university that we've donated, so they don't have to go and get a job outside of the university. So they can spend and focus all their energies on everything they've learned and focus it into the type of research that one of the faculty members needs them to do. That usually only happens at the graduate level, but we're trying to make that possible for undergraduates so that they can get that experience, and they usually end up working in research areas that we care about, that the NNSA cares about, so they get to learn about the focus of the NNSS and the NNSA, and hopefully they apply to our intern programs that we have every summer. And by going through that, it's an easy way to find out if they really want to work with us, or you know, if they rather go and go to Google or other places. But we usually, they keep knocking at the door after those experiences. So.
Yeah, thank you, Jose. And one thing that we found, or at least I learned early on, is that it isn't the scholarship that's going to get the student. Most of the kids that are dropping out of UNLV were dropping out because they couldn't put milk and eggs and bread on the table. And so giving them work opportunities is a double benefit. Number one, it benefits us, and it keeps them in school. So that's a lot of the focus you can hear of what we're trying to do, is give them meaningful, productive work for them as they go forward.
I have a real simple question. Do you live at the site, or do you live here?
I'm in Summerlin.
You're in Summerlin, so, okay, but what about?
But go ahead. Talk about the dorms and stuff like that.
Well, dorms or living spots or anything.
We
for
do have
families?
places to live out there. Everybody lives in Vegas that works out there primarily, or in Pahrump. We used to have beds in our office. Those went away, thank God. But in the dorms, they've been modernizing them a little bit. And they do have places that you can spend the night, but it's just on a temporary basis. It's usually when people are coming in, you know, are going to work out there for a day or two, but primarily they go back to Vegas. The attraction's back in Vegas, you know.
So when I was traveling out here for multiple years, I would stay out in the dorms quite a bit because the first meeting of the day typically was around 6 o'clock in the morning. And so, and because I was traveling, you're burning the midnight oil, so you want to go home. And so having that ability especially for our laboratory travelers, to spend the night in the dorms is really useful. And we have that, and we've upgraded the dorms. In times gone past, people did kind of take up residency there, and there's a post office and other things, but it's right back there. Yeah, so we don't do that so much anymore. Well, we really don't have anybody living there anymore. Yes, but maybe not on the site. We're actually looking at the Indian Springs area and looking at the development there and what can we do to help. Okay.
We do have a follow-up question on the question about UNLV. Now, how closely does the talent acquisition team look specifically at UNLV graduates, specifically in mechanical engineering or the physics department? And are local people more preferred for the site?
Well, we actually have our talent acquisition manager here who had no idea he was going to be answering questions. But Brett?
Thanks, Mark. Good evening, Brent Baker. And yeah, we actually were just at the combined STEM fair last week that's both sciences and engineering, and met just a great slate of candidates that we're excited to bring in for both internships as well as full-time employment. So we value our relationship with the local schools, UNLV, CSN, Nevada State College, where we're continuing to build those inroads. And so I think specifically for UNLV, the engineering program is one that we really do continue to invest in, both from a talent standpoint, I think also just to continue to explore those research opportunities with the school. So for our MSTS contract, we're at about just shy of 2,600 employees. And that's both our bargaining and our non-bargaining workforce. Thank you.
Thank you, Brett. I'm going to see if there's any last questions here on Zoom. And I don't believe there are. So
Quick, close the meeting. Before we get a tough one. Really tough. Oh, right here, it's a tough one. How many people were on Zoom? I don't know.
I believe we had about 50 on Zoom this evening. So total about 100, which is a great turnout. And in order to wrap things up, what I first want to do is, once again, on behalf of the National Atomic Testing Museum and the Nevada Test Site Historical Foundation, I want to thank our expert panelists for presenting this evening, for speaking about the great work that they do. And I also want to, yes, absolutely, yes. And I also want to take this time to thank those of you in attendance, both in person and on Zoom. We appreciate you taking this time out of your evening to learn about the critical projects that the Nevada National Security Site is currently doing and its impact on not just national security, but global security for our allies, but also to monitor what is going on in the world. And so with that, I want to thank you all again for coming this evening, and I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your night.